Good morning from our New York studio. My name is Gad Lebanon, and I'm head of the Labor Market Institute here at the Conference Board. It's my pleasure to host the last edition of the Human Capital Watch for 2019. And today we're going to talk about recruitment solutions to the labor shortages problem. It's part of a large project that we've completed and will be published in a report very soon. I will start with what are some of the main topics that we will discuss today. So first, briefly about the impact of the US labor market shortages on recruiting, the recruiting challenges that organizations are faced with. And the focus of this webcast is on solutions, what are the most and least used solutions, and those solutions that are used by organizations that are most affected by labor shortages, and those used for recruiting for blue-collar versus white-collar workers. A lot of what you're going to hear today is based on our survey, labor shortages solution survey, that has yielded a lot of interesting results. But before we get there, of course, some of you are interested in credit, so you can earn HRCI, SHRM, and CPE credit. You have to put your full name, email address, and specify the type of credit you're looking for. And there will be 3 OK pop-ups during the program that you need to click. It's my pleasure to introduce the two colleagues that are going to do the webcast with me today. First, from Chicago. Are you in Chicago today, Robin?
I am, yes, thank
So
you, Gad.
Robin Erickson, she's a principal researcher in the human capital team. And from Maryland, Elizabeth Crowfoot, a senior researcher in labor markets at the Conference Board.
Thanks for having me,
Welcome
Gad.
to both of you. We're going to start with a brief introduction on why we even have this problem. No, it's not a surprise at this point. A lot of companies are experiencing labor shortages, and in fact, in our CEO challenge survey, attracting and retaining top talent is the #1 hot button issue in essentially every part of the world. So this is something that companies are already feeling. We are seeing this in their in retention rate. So what we have here in the red line is the unemployment rate, the lowest in 50 years. It's 3.5% now. And a mirror image of the unemployment rate is the quits rate. So what a percent of workers voluntarily quit their jobs, usually to go to another job. That's also rising rapidly and already above pre-recession rates. So it is there are more opportunities out there, and more people are taking advantage of them. It's also harder to recruit when labor markets are so tight. This is a measure of recruiting, 2 measures of recruiting difficulties from the National Federation of Independent Businesses survey. Both of them suggest that now it is harder to find qualified workers than any other time during the survey's history. And when it's harder to recruit and harder to retain, companies have to dig further down the resume pile, and it's not a free lunch. It turns out that part of the impact is that they have more concerns and complaints about the quality of labor. So again, from the NFIB survey, when they are asked, what's your single most important problem? The blue line shows the percent reporting quality of labor. This is the #1 problem now, and the highest highest percentage this answer received in the history of the survey. We're going to talk next about a recruitment challenge, but I believe that we first have a polling. Not the polling survey will come.
No, I was just going to introduce the survey.
Right. So, Robin, can you give an introduction to the topic of the recruitment solutions?
Sure. Thank you, Gad. And as Gad mentioned, we have been working on this topic for a very long time. The labor market team has been talking about shortages within the labor market for many years. And we decided that it would make sense to look at, well, what are some of the solutions then to labor market shortages? And so, interestingly, many executives have never operated in a period of a tight labor market because the last time was in the late 90s. And so we did quite an extensive online survey. We asked the questions, what is your organization doing to solve the labor shortage problem? And we had the respondents select from 59 possible solutions to both recruitment and retention difficulties. This webinar, we're just looking at recruitment, and early next year we'll do one looking at the retention solutions. But did want to just let you know we had 225 business leaders, mostly HR practitioners. You can see there the split, 70% were in services, 30% were non-services. And nearly half of the companies, 48%, had mostly white-collar workers. And so we're going to actually go over some detail today around blue-collar and white-collar strategies. And most of our survey respondents were large enterprises. You can see there 64% had revenues of $1 billion or more, and 75% had 1,000 or more employees. So with that, I'll have Gad go through our first polling question.
Right. So you can see the polling question on your screen in a minute. So you can tell us what you think. So the question is your organization having difficulty recruiting and or retaining workers? So there are several options here. One is difficulty recruiting, second, difficulty retaining, difficulty both recruiting and retaining, not having difficulty either recruiting or retaining, and do not know. So there are several options here. Again, difficulty recruiting, retaining, both recruiting and retaining, or not having any difficulties. So let's give it a few more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close the survey. Okay, so from the results here, I would say if you add up the third option and the first option, that means that 81% of the respondents have recruiting difficulties. Most of them, or 50% of the entire survey, are experiencing both recruiting and retaining difficulties. And only 12.5% are not having difficulty either recruiting or retaining. Any quick reactions to the results?
I think these are very interesting results, especially because if we go to the next slide, they are very similar to our survey respondents, which, as you can see, we asked this exact question in our survey. And if you look at the top right, the black segment, you can see that 28% had difficulty recruiting only, and then 42% had difficulty both recruiting and retaining. So that was a total of 70% that had difficulty recruiting. I'm not surprised that we have more people having difficulty recruiting because that's the topic of this seminar, of this webcast. And then the difficulty recruiting numbers were much smaller, but it was 48%, almost half. So very excited to see those results, and right in line, I think, with our survey, especially considering the topic of our of our webcast today. Elizabeth, do you agree?
Yes, definitely. And what I would also point out on this chart is that a whole 20% of our survey respondents said that they were having neither difficulty recruiting or retaining. And that wasn't so much in line with our respondents, clearly because they're attending this webcast to begin with. They might have some challenges they want to learn about. But it is interesting that there are some companies that aren't really facing these challenges, and they mostly tend to be larger companies with very strong employment brands that are still seeing those workers lining up at their doorstep for those employment opportunities. So a little bit of a difference there.
And
it's true. And just so everybody knows, sorry, Gad, I'll come back to you in just a second, but we did delete that 20% of organizations, actually the 24%, the ones that were not having difficulty and they didn't know, so that our survey responses really are applicable for those companies that are having difficulty. Gad, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to remind our audience that if they have a question, no need to wait until the end. They can type it in the question pod and we'll take them as they come.
Yes, thank you.
So, Robin, so what else did the survey tell us?
So the survey, we also looked at, earlier I mentioned that we did look at the split between companies in blue collar industries and those in white collar. You can see that the respondents who were having recruitment difficulties, 64% were in mostly white collar. Very similar, was about half and half, but you can see there's a really big spike there with the mostly blue collar industries and at 85%. And so we've actually, in the slide, which you can download if you're interested, you can see all of the different industries that we were including in all of those groups. So we did want to go to another poll question, though, and get some information from you all about what happened as a result of recruitment difficulties. So Gad, if you want to go through that.
Sure. So the second poll question is, which of the following have happened in your company as a result of recruitment difficulties? And you can choose more than one option here. Operating with unfilled positions, lower output or turning down business due to lower capacity, increased employee workload, measurable adverse impact on company's bottom line, decreased candidate conversion rate, candidates not showing up for scheduled interviews. So again, you can.
Again, we should probably give them just a little bit longer to go through all of them.
And you can choose. You can choose more than one, or you can choose 6 options. You can try to choose 7, exactly, but you won't be able to. But 6 you can choose.
Well, and I think we had about 13 or 14 in our original survey. So we didn't give you guys all of them. We just gave you guys some of them.
Yeah. So we'll let you chew on it for a few more seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're closing the survey. So clearly the two most popular impacts or the ways that companies were affected were operating with unfilled positions and increased employee workload or overtime. And those are experienced by most of you. Decreased candidate conversion rate was also quite popular. After that, lower output or turning down business, that is 17%, as well as candidate not showing up for scheduled interviews, or ghosting, that's another way to call it. And 11% said that they are experiencing measurable adverse impact on the company's bottom line. Any reactions, Elizabeth, Robin?
Robin, I'll let you go for it.
Okay, we're gonna share the actual survey results with you. Not surprisingly, the actual numbers that you guys came up with, the numbers 1 and 2, operating with unfilled positions and increased employee workload or overtime, those were the top 2 that you had. And you can see they were the top two in our survey by a large margin. The other responses cluster together a little bit more. The thing that I find most interesting about this, and Gad and Elizabeth, you're welcome to jump in, is that when you look all the way at the bottom to measurable adverse impact on the company's bottom line profitability and higher prices, like those are basically not happening. And so with this very tight labor market that Gad had just explained to us, you have to sort of wonder what's happening as a result of 88% of the companies, or over 90% in our survey, operating with unfilled positions. In my opinion, it's just on the backs of the current employees. They're just expecting them to do more with less. Gad or Elizabeth, do you want to jump in there?
Well,
I actually was going to say the same exact thing, that it really shows how employers are squeezing the most out of their current employees rather than trying to recruit new individuals, because it's just a challenging environment. So doing more with less, that seems to be the common theme.
Yeah, I would mention that when we look at more detailed results to this question, and you break it down by companies that mostly hire blue-collar workers versus white-collar workers, you see for the measurable adverse impact on companies' profitability, you see very different results. So 37% of companies that hire mostly blue-collar workers are reporting those profitability impacts versus I think 8 or 7% for companies that hire mostly white-collar. So since labor shortages are clearly more visible in the blue-collar occupations, it's not surprising that we see this variation in results here.
I completely agree. And in fact, if we go to the next couple slides, the next slide is actually just telling you we're going to go to the next section, which is around recruitment solutions. But we asked, remember I told you we had 59 solutions. Well, the number one solution that's being used for companies with recruitment difficulties is to increase wages or salaries. And so I'm actually surprised that the lower profitability number that we just saw as the outcome is not higher, because if companies are having to increase wages and salaries, then you would think that they would be at the same time having a lower profitability. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the next year or so. Just wanted to, you can see that increasing wages or salaries is 20% more, 20% more of a popular response. The other top solutions cluster more closely. And Elizabeth's going to speak to some of these when she goes through the slides on the companies that were most impacted by their recruitment difficulties. But I did just want to mention a few of these to you. Increasing efforts to foster a thriving company culture. Earlier, Elizabeth mentioned that there are companies that aren't experiencing difficulties because they have very strong employment brands. And today, it's easier than it ever has been for employees to find a job. They can apply to many jobs very quickly. And it's a tight labor market, as we've said. So organizations really should be starting to think about what can they do to make their company more attractive. And it will, that inclusive employment brand, which we also have a little bit lower, improving and communicating employment brand. But those two go together very closely, the thriving company culture and the employment brand. And it will help bring people into your organization, because the internet has increased the transparency of organizations. Glassdoor was a little bit prophetic at the time, because at the time we really couldn't see much inside organizations. However, now, it's almost a glass wall into an organization. So just wanted to bring those few things up. The other thing that I thought was interesting was that some organizations are starting to think about increasing the recruitment at job fairs, and thinking, how else can we get the word out? How can we get more people? Can we get them earlier in their career? So that's another one of the areas that we think is is pretty interesting. And so I don't want to steal Elizabeth's thunder. So those are our top recruitment challenges. And we actually, before we tell you what the bottom solutions are, we have another polling question, our last and final polling question for you.
Yeah, so you'll be able to see it on the screen in a second. Yeah. Okay, so when hiring externally, do you accept alternate credentials in lieu of a degree or diploma? The options are yes, no, but we're considering it, no, and I don't know. So again,
yeah, this is very, yeah, just to mention as we're getting the results of this in, I'm actually working on a report right now around alternate credentials and the fact that while it would seem to be a
wait,
good,
Robin, maybe not to bias the vote. Maybe you can provide the
wait to tell everybody. Okay.
Provide your commentary after they vote.
Okay.
It's my survey producer in me is jumping. Yeah. So let's give it a few more seconds. Yeah. So
I think that closed the vote. Yeah.
So a pretty even distribution here. The most popular answer is 36% saying no, and another 18% are also saying no, but they are considering it, and that's versus 23% who said yes. So is this surprising that there is such a majority of no's here, Robin?
Actually, it's not, and that's that was what I was starting to just say. You would think that organizations would think about accepting alternate credentials if they're having a hard time hiring, and so that's why we're writing this report, basically as a primer to help organizations understand the importance of alternate credentials and really what they are and how they could go about thinking about them. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see the reason why this poll question came before the bottom results is because accepting alternate credentials is in that bottom the bottom set of results. So hopefully the publishing team can bring the slides up. Terrific, thank you. So that's the top solutions, and then if we go, I'll move it to the next slide. The bottom solutions, and so this slide is. You can see that the very first one says hired using an online labor platform, and that's only, I believe, 6%. However, just wanted to make sure that you guys understood that was the absolute bottom. So they're flipped just a little bit in terms of the smaller responses being at the top here. So you can see that very few people are hiring using online labor platforms for those cloud workers in the cloud. You can see that a lot of organizations aren't improving or increasing the transparency of health and safety. They're not lowering or eliminating drug background check requirements. In some cases, you might say, thank goodness. In others, it is a real issue because many states have now legalized the use of marijuana. The next couple I found were very interesting in that organizations are not decreasing required overtime, and they're not offering or increasing optional employee overtime. So overtime is a double-edged sword. There's some employees who want more, and there's some employees who want less, and so that's why we asked the question both ways. And you can see, the responses there. I won't go through all of these because I do know that Elizabeth is going to talk to them, but getting back to the accepting alternate credentials such as a certification, you can see that only 18% of companies in our survey that are having recruitment difficulties are using that, and that's very close to the numbers that we just saw, which were 22.7 said yes, they were using that. So 18 to 22.7, I think, is a really good representation. So to answer your earlier question, Gad, yes, very few companies are using this, and it's definitely something that we should that we can be encouraging organizations to look at.
No, that's very interesting.
Do you want to add anything else? Yeah, do you want to add anything else?
No, I think you covered this well, and Elizabeth is going to expand on a lot of those issues in greater detail. So, Elizabeth, do you want to talk a little about how we analyze some of those results?
Yes, definitely. So another way that we looked at the data, so Robin was going over the top and bottom solutions from the survey respondents. And another way to look at it is by seeing what are the survey respondents that are more and less impacted by labor shortages. And we define these groups by looking at their responses to those business impact questions that Robin took us through just a few minutes ago. So companies that identified 5 or more of those adverse business outcomes, or that selected 5 or more, we defined as being more impacted by labor shortages, and those companies that selected less than 5 outcomes as being less impacted. And overall, what we're finding is that it's the companies that are mostly composed of blue-collar workers that are more severely impacted by labor shortages, and in turn, they're the ones that are more active in trying to solve this problem. They're the ones that ticked off 15 and 20 different independent solutions in order to try to solve this challenge. And Robin did mention that raising wages and salaries was the #1 solution overall, but that only goes so far. Really, what it's about is implementing a combination of solutions that work in different areas of the organization and to attract different types of candidates. So the following on the slide, the 5 different buckets of solutions that we identified that more impacted companies are using are in these areas: tactical recruitment and retention solutions. And we'll just focus on the tactical recruitment items in this webcast, but these are essentially low-hanging fruit that are implemented relatively easily by talent acquisition teams. So items that can either be implemented rather autonomously without a lot of buy-in from other parts of the organization, and also they are generally lower cost, so they're easier to implement. The second grouping is reevaluating job criteria and reevaluating jobs and relaxing hiring criteria. The third, increasing training and developing talent pipelines. The fourth, making the company a more attractive place to work. And the fifth, expanding the target recruitment demographic. So in the following slides, I'll talk a little bit in more detail about these 5 types of solutions. So first of all, the biggest difference that we saw between the most and least impacted companies is that the more impacted ones are making tactical changes to their recruitment processes. So what you're seeing in this slide is the number of respondents that chose each specific solution. And in the left-hand side panel, you see the comparison between the least and the most impacted companies. And in the right side panel, the comparison between mostly blue-collar companies and mostly white-collar companies. If you go back to the most and least impacted panel, the other aspect that's important in this chart is the gap between the two. So what we argue is that the solutions with the largest gaps in usage intensity between the firms most and least affected, those are the actual solutions that firms are using to combat this problem. Where you see solutions that have little to no gap, those are solutions that are generally used regardless of labor shortages. They're more general business and talent acquisition strategies that are just good business. For example, trying to improve employee engagement or improving that employment brand. Those are aspects that are done regardless of what the labor market environment looks like. So again, the ones with the largest gaps are those that we deem as more so that are tending to move the needle more in terms of solving this problem. So the largest gap overall was adding or modifying employee referral programs. So we see that beefing up those referral programs, we have examples of companies that are attributing 30, 40, and 50% of their recruitment to that referral program. And it's, it seems to be a very good way to both motivate current employees and to attract new talent into the company. We also see here contracting with staffing firms to fill positions was selected by 68% of the most impacted companies. Implementing new and advanced technologies to streamline recruitment and better target candidates. We see or we hear of companies in our follow-up interviews to our survey of companies that are starting to implement software programs that enable them to really aggregate recruitment leads from different online sites, whether they're social media or things like LinkedIn, into one system that more easily allows them to go through the results and to reach out to new candidates. Also, one trucking company that we spoke to was implementing software that as soon as they received an application would immediately send out a text message to that individual notifying them that they received their application, and really trying to enhance those touch points or make them happen more quickly. Another example here, another solution, is shortening the recruitment process with fewer interviews. We do have examples, or we hear of examples of retail companies, especially doing same-day hiring. And Lowe's, for example, does a marathon hiring event. And a lot of these things happen during this holiday season, too, where there's a need for many hires to happen very quickly. So essentially really reducing the number of interviews and making the recruitment process speed along.
Elizabeth,
and finally, increasing
the shortening of the recruitment process, that probably impacted by the ghosting phenomena that we saw in the earlier slide, that there are a lot of people who don't show up to scheduled interviews and without notifying anyone. So when that happens, clearly shortening a recruitment process would avoid some of those situations.
Yes, I think what employers are finding is that those long, lengthy recruitment processes, candidates, are quickly moving on to new opportunities because they're readily available. So if you don't act quickly, you're going to lose those candidates. So that's definitely the impetus behind this particular solution. And the last one on here is increasing social media efforts. That was the #2 solution for recruiting blue-collar candidates behind increasing wages and salaries. The companies we spoke to said they were really ramping up their social media efforts on Facebook especially, and that's one way to really reach this blue-collar population. But I'll move on to the next group here of solutions. So we also see that more impacted companies are more likely to reevaluate job requirements and relax hiring criteria. If you look at the bottom solution here, we have 41% of the most impacted firms that are reevaluating jobs to better assess credential requirements. And this is related to what Robin was talking to earlier. Essentially, the hiring managers that I talked to are just recalibrating their expectations about what this labor market is offering right now. And so they're getting rid of all their nice-to-haves on their list and really focusing on the must-haves in terms of the skills and competencies that they're looking for. So as a result, they're having to lower requirements for prior experience and for certain skills. And to a lesser extent, they are accepting alternate credentials, which we saw as a result of our polling in this webcast also, and they're lowering degree requirements. So, for example, I talked to a chemical manufacturer that was reducing the degree requirement for certain production roles, so they were eliminating a high school education or a GED requirement, and for certain IT roles, they were also eliminating the BA or BS requirement. And we see a lot of that in those IT roles. Companies like IBM have also eliminated that 4-year degree and instead are accepting candidates that have gone through a coding boot camp or a related vocational program that still gives them the core competencies or skills that they need. Anything to add here, Robin? I know that this is related to what you were talking to earlier.
No, I think you got it. I think that I love the way that we looked at this, just simply from the perspective of the most impacted and least impacted. And like I said, we are looking at the alternate credentials and the solutions that go along with it. So simply because we do think that this is another way for organizations to hire more in a tighter, like in a tight market. Yep.
And it does seem that companies are more willing to do this for blue-collar roles than for white-collar roles. So there is a difference there that you see on that right-hand side of the panel.
I would add that
go ahead.
if you look at the previous slide, those solutions in general were more popular. Even the less impacted one has 20-30% companies that were doing it, but when it comes to lowering requirement, that is in general a less popular option, and the less impacted companies are barely doing it. So it's almost like those are not the go-to, the first thing that companies are happy to do, but when push comes to shove and they really struggle recruiting, they will lower requirements. And
I'll just add one more thing. Sorry, I was just going to say one of the areas that we've seen in our initial research on this topic is that organizations will often lower requirements for experience for promotions because they've already seen the person perform in a role and they know that they have the correct experience needed. So, but it's a much bigger issue when you start to think about, do you still need to require a bachelor's degree? And I think, that job requirement came about when we had a very loose labor market and there were more candidates than there were jobs. And so companies, decided to say, okay, well, an easy criteria is you must have a BA for a certain role.
So Robin and Elizabeth, there is a question here about in terms of shortening the interview process, what are your thoughts about using HireVue, or I guess, or any vendor that does remote interviews through the computer without going on site or talking to a human to shorten the interview process? Any thoughts?
Well, I would say I'm happy to answer this one. We are just published a report on AI for HR, separating the potential from the hype. So you can find that. It's sort of a broad report. It's mostly for non-technologists. We are then going to look at the different sub-functions within HR. So I've actually already written a report on artificial intelligence for talent acquisition, and we're just waiting for it to be published then. But talent acquisition uses many of the so-called artificial intelligence tools, the assisted or augmented intelligence tools. And there are definitely advantages to using technology, including, like you were saying, HireVue or some of the other tools to help with trying to find candidates and actually rank order those candidates. So there's the ability to both find candidates and then rank order them based on pre-existing criteria. So that's definitely something that that will be coming soon, and that Elizabeth's going to talk to a little bit about using automation to try to help with some of these recruiting difficulties as well.
Elizabeth, did HireVue or other vendors come up in the interviews that you've done?
Actually, they didn't. I didn't hear of any specific examples of using remote interviews, but it sounds like it's a very logical next step for companies to do that to shorten that interview process. Yeah. I see another question.
So, sorry, Elizabeth, I was just going to add, it's not without its own dangers, though. So there's bias that's implicit within using tools. There's issues around data privacy and transparency. So the question that came in is, what do you think? Well, we think that they can be very useful, but there also needs to be a lot of vigilance that goes along with using them. So.
Yeah.
And the next question, too, about retraining current employees to fill position, that's a great transition into the next group of solutions. So lowering hiring requirements does create a need for improving the skills of new recruits by investing more in training and in developing talent pipelines. And when I was talking to hiring managers, a common theme was, just give me 50% or 60% of what I need, and I'll train the rest. So there's this mentality that yes, we can hire or recruit for very basic competencies, focusing on those individuals that are trainable, that have some technical aptitude, and then we can take them where we need to go. So in this space, providing or expanding online learning opportunities was very popular. So online offerings from LinkedIn, for example, or Skillsoft. So companies are right now, what I hear is that they're less able or less willing to really dole out direct financial assistance, for example, for tuition reimbursement or to beef up their own internal training programs. And they're really using these online learning offerings to capitalize on trying to take their candidates where they need to go. In terms of the blue-collar space, focusing on beefing up apprenticeship programs, internship programs, and also developing integrated work programs with colleges, high schools, and trade schools is very important for the blue-collar occupations. There's one example of a corporation, Nidec Corporation, which is an electronic motor company, and they've coined the term a reverse internship. So they have a relationship with a local vocational school, and they actually have an on-site, a microsite on the campus. So a place where their interns that they hire from, that are students that are hired, and they can go to this microsite on campus and learn the processes of maintaining and assembling those electric motors. So at the end of the day, the company now has an active pipeline of students, and these students now have experience working directly with the company's product and a direct line into those production roles for that particular employer. So those are the type of innovative programs that companies are now looking towards. More generally, the Manufacturing Institute has something called Manufacturing Day, where companies like GM, and other large companies, as well as smaller manufacturers, open their doors to the community. So they have students and teachers and parents come in, tour the facility, and learn what it means to be in a modern manufacturing career today. So it's about getting rid of some of those old perceptions that maybe manufacturing might be old or dirty or not as high tech as maybe some other industries, and as a way to increase the pipeline of younger workers. So those are some examples there. Moving on to the next group of, oh, I went too far. So some more impacted companies are also more focused on developing policies around flexibility and reducing the burden of work. Oftentimes we think of workers working from home. That generally applies to white-collar workers. And you do see that at the bottom of our list here, offering telework and or remote flexibility. But increasingly, blue-collar employers are also experimenting with increasing work schedule flexibility, which is the first solution on this slide. So even manufacturers, for example, that have a very set production process that's time sensitive, that needs to appear or happen in a particular sequence, they're starting to say, our workers, we need to attract workers, and what they want is more flexibility in their schedules. So we're going to allow them to select their own working schedules, to have floating start times, to be able to swap shifts with their coworkers. And some of these fears that there would have these production bottlenecks in the system because the workers are basically determining their own schedules, those production bottlenecks didn't materialize. Instead, what some of the manufacturers that we talked to indicated was that their absenteeism went down, and also employee morale went up. So it was really a win-win in that particular scenario. But again, blue-collar companies don't necessarily have to be as rigid as we once thought that they needed to be. Other solutions, decreasing required employee overtime, improving working conditions. This is, for example, in terms of work responsibilities or the physical environment, increasing efforts to monitor and, if necessary, reduce employee workload, and increasing efforts to streamline boring or burdensome tasks. And often this is done with adding new technologies to business processes as well, and mostly for white-collar workers, but also increasingly for blue-collar as well. So I'm cognizant of the time, so go ahead, Gad.
Speaking of flexibility, there was a fascinating article in the Wall Street Journal a week ago about FedEx and their struggles of hiring people in Memphis they have thousands of people there, but they're struggling to fill all the positions. So what they're doing is there is a town in the Mississippi Delta that has a high unemployment rate. So they are busing people from that town. It's a 2-hour one-way, 4-hour round trip just to get several dozens of people every day to do the night shift in Memphis. So, again, when push comes to shove, companies are very creative in finding ways to get workers to where they need to be.
Related to that, one of the solutions that we offered was providing moving cost compensation. So there are examples of manufacturers that are relocating their employees to different plants or different facilities, and GM offers a relocation package of $30,000 if you're willing to move to another location that may not have the talent or the people that particular plant needs. So there are so many different and innovative ways that companies now are implementing to attract talent. And moving on to the next group of solutions. So more impacted companies have increased their efforts to recruit underserved populations, such as women, veterans, the disabled, and immigrants. So here we see that 59% of the most impacted companies are expanding their target recruitment demographic versus just 35% of those that are not as impacted. And again, the gap is very wide between blue-collar companies and white-collar companies. So it's really a blue-collar solution to the labor shortage problem. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about strategies to attract women specifically, but I do want to mention a couple of other examples that we're hearing about for attracting veterans, the disabled, and immigrants. In terms of the veteran population, a lot of companies are developing community partnerships with military bases and their transitional officers, and also programs like Operation Reboot and Heroes Make America. Those are programs that are facilitating the transition of veterans to the private sector. And also, for example, Microsoft has a software and systems academy that is essentially an 18-week coding boot camp for active military that are in the process of transitioning. And there are companies like Facebook, Oracle, and Southwest Airlines, and it's really a consortium of 500 different companies that are using Microsoft's training program, and they're hiring graduates from that program in order to beef up their veteran population within their companies. In terms of the disabled, a lot of companies, again, are working with nonprofit organizations or other community programs. There was one manufacturer that I talked to that was linked up with a local nonprofit called RCS, and was contracting mentally and developmentally disabled adults for packaging and assembly services. And many companies now, there's some examples here on the slide, SAP, Ernst & Young, Ford, et cetera, that have active autism at work programs that are targeting those individuals, especially for IT positions. So it's really opening the door to a new type of population. In terms of immigrants, a lot of companies now are starting to offer English as a second language training. And these are classes that workers can take while they're on the clock at the company. And this not only attracts non-speaking or non-English speaking immigrants, but it also adds to increases employee engagement and retention because now they have increased proficiency in English and are able to just be more engaged with the company as a whole. So these are some other tactics that companies are using to target these types of populations. And specifically for women, we see here that employers are indeed hiring more women in male-dominated occupations, and most visibly in the transportation sector. You see that in this chart. The red line is representing transportation and material moving, and you see that trend is moving up, as well as for construction and extraction, as well as in that sector as well. So there are more women moving in this into these traditionally male-dominated roles. Mm-hmm. And the way that they are doing that, Gad, did you want to add something here?
No, I actually there are a couple of questions that are somewhat related to this topic, but finish your sentence and we'll get to that.
Actually, I was going to move on to the next slide.
So I guess in the context of hiring underrepresented populations, there's a question here, are companies looking at the homeless population? Did you hear anything or read anything about that?
I did not actually, but that's a really interesting demographic and group. I think, again, it would be a... Go ahead, Robin.
I was just saying, I haven't heard about the homeless population, but I have heard about working with refugees and those who are actually currently incarcerated and or previously incarcerated. And we're actually going to be working on a report looking at some of this next year as well. So
yeah,
stay
and
tuned.
I can promise you that as soon as I'm done with this webcast, I'm going to Google labor shortages and homeless to see if anywhere this did come up, because it is an interesting question. There's another question here, if you know, how are companies modifying the recruiting sourcing process for candidates with disabilities? Any?
Actually, that's a very good question, and especially for companies that are targeting the autistic community, because the autistic individuals have very specific needs or social, I would say, challenges. The companies are modifying the interview process. So instead of just a 1-hour interview that is very high pressure, it's actually a 3 to 5 day interview process where the individual has the time to show the skill set, and also it's more behavioral type interviewing. So the companies will give those individuals certain challenges. For example, excuse my dogs that are barking here. But
that is also a potential solution to labor shortages, dogs.
Exactly.
So no, it's an important part of the discussion.
But yes, there are ways that companies are modifying the interview process depending on the specific demographic that they're targeting. And just
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to quickly run through a couple of these items for how to attract women to these male-dominated roles. So really, it's about offering women support and recognition in these male-dominated industries. One way is through online forums and employee groups that are focused on minimizing obstacles faced by women. The Manufacturing Institute has something called the Step Ahead Award. So STEP stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Production. So it's these females that are involved in manufacturing roles that are being recognized for their contributions in manufacturing and inspiring other women to join the industry as well. The trucking and construction industries are also focusing on safety and physical accommodations. For example, providing women with workwear and protective equipment that actually fits them properly. In trucking, offering female-friendly vehicle packages, and also allowing women to stay in hotel rooms rather than sleeping in a truck rest stop. That isn't the safest environment for a woman that's traveling solo. Also in trucking, trying to accommodate more women's social and family obligations. For example, altering trucking routes so women are home less often. So instead of being away for 2 to 3 weeks, they're away for only 2 to 3 days and able then to come back home. So companies are really trying to think, how can we modify our business operations to better suit the type of people that we need to work for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, this is just a quick look at some of how Black workers have also been, employment of Black workers has increased across all the occupations from blue collar, management, and professional occupations, manual services, and sales and office as well. So employers are definitely targeting Blacks and other minorities as well.
I think the very tight labor market is bringing more people who typically are less connected to the labor market. They are bringing them in, and we're seeing the lowest unemployment rate ever for the Black population. And as you can see, in across many types of jobs, we're seeing a large increase in the share of Black workers. So maybe to summarize the key findings, is it Elizabeth or Robin?
Yes, I can just to quickly recap. So companies are using a mix of labor shortages. And again, these are the different buckets that we went over: tactical recruitment solutions, referral programs, social media, and staffing firms are the big hitters here. Reevaluating job requirements and relaxing the hiring criteria, really reworking those job descriptions based on the core competencies, and lowering experience and skill requirements. Increasing training and developing talent pipelines, again, really establishing and cultivating those relationships with local colleges and high schools and trade schools, and in turn, beefing up internship and apprenticeship programs. Increasing work schedule flexibility is the primary way that companies are making their company a more attractive place to work, and particularly by allowing those workers to select their own working times and to give them more flexibility as to when they choose to work. And then recruiting underserved populations, again, women, veterans, disabled, immigrants, the homeless maybe, the previously incarcerated. I mean, there are other groups that companies should be reaching out to if they are experiencing labor shortages with the traditional suspects or the traditional recruits.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. Do your dogs have anything to add?
No, I think they've calmed down a little bit now.
Good. Thank you very much, Robin and Elizabeth. We're almost at the top of the hour, so I just wanted to mention a few other webcasts. So next month on the Human Capital Watch is the annual C-Suite Challenge webcast. Rebecca Ray and Chuck Mitchell will present those results. And if you're interested in this conference, Transformative Practices to Unlock Human Potential, if you show this code, you get a $500 discount. So please consider that. And if you can stay on the line after we are done here to give us some feedback, that would be great. Just a reminder that everything you heard here and much, much more will appear in a large report that is coming out in the next couple of weeks, and something for you maybe to read during the holidays. And I just want to, I think for many of us, it's the last webcast of the year, so I want to wish you happy holidays and happy Festivus for the rest of us from New York. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Elizabeth, and have a good rest of the day.